Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph will begin the bottom line of Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Tan Rabbanan, we learned in a brayso, Ein Eivin Pas Ava bePesach. You can't bake a thick loaf of bread on Pesach, meaning the matzah that you have on Pesach can't be thick. The dough can't be thick. It has to be thinner. Divrei Beis Shammai, that's what Beis Shammai says. Beis Hillel matirim, however, Beis Hillel are matir. At this point, what we're assuming is that the Beis Shammai says if the matzah is thick, it's hard to ensure that it's not going to become chometz, and therefore you cannot bake that type of a matzah. But Beis Hillel are saying it's mutter. The kama pas ava, how thick? When we say a thick loaf, how thick are we referring to? What thickness are we referring to? Amar Rav Huna tefach. He says it's a tefach. Shekein masin belechem upon him tefach. That the lechem upon him had to be matzah. It could not be chometz. And we know the thickness of the bread, that the loaves for the lechem upon him were a tefach. Upon him, the Gemara says that the minimum size of a face of is a tefach. So the lechem upon him were a tefach. They had to be matzah. They could not be chometz. So therefore, something that is the thickness of a tefach is permissible, but something that's thicker than that is not. Masechet Rav Yosef, he says, how can you make a comparison, bring an analogy to the lechem upon him? What's the comparison? Imam reason over there, we say a tefach thickness is permissible because of there, the Kohanim are zrizim. The base garmo that baked the bread, they were experts and they were zrizim, they're very diligent. So there they can ensure that even though there was a thickness of a tefach, it would not become chometz. But Yom Rabbi Shein is zrizim. What should we say it by? People who are not zrizim, by the hamayim, should we also permit a tefach? Imam Rabba Pasam Mela, if they said in the case over there where the dough that was there made by for the lechem upon him is Pasam Mela, it was worked, it was pounded and it was kneaded, it was done very diligently. It was 300 pounding and 300 rubbings rather, and 500 poundings. They rubbed it and pounded. It was done and worked so well. So by working the dough that vigorously, it prevents it from becoming chometz. But Yom Rabba Pas She'eino Mela, should we say it by pas that used for matzah and Pesach, that's made by the hamayim, that's not worked so much? If they said it by the wood, that's used the firewood, that's used for the oven. In the base of Mikdash, it was all dry. They dried out the wood and they dried it up, and they did not bring extra wood after Tu B'Av. So they ensured that the wood that was used was wood that was dried out in the summer and not through, it didn't have the moisture in it. So therefore, it was very hot and there wasn't moisture in it, and therefore it would ensure that the dough would not become chometz. So Yomru be'etzim lachim, should they say it in a case where etzim is lachim and where it has more moisture in it, it doesn't bake as quickly, there's more of a likelihood that it can become chometz? If they said it in the case of the base of Mikdash where the oven was hot, there was always baking over there for the menachos, etc. The oven was very hot, and therefore it would ensure that it wouldn't become chometz. It would not the dough would not rise and become chometz. Should they say it Yom Rabbatano at Sanan? Should they say it in regular ovens which are not as hot? The Tana of the base of Mikdash was made out of metal, and therefore the heat was hotter. The common ovens that they used by the hamayim in those days were cheres, made out of earthenware. It's not as hot. How can you compare it? So therefore, there's no comparison to there that the thickness is of a tefach. Amar Rav Yomi Bar Abba Shilti is Rebbe Biyuchid. He said, I asked his Rebbe privately, Umanu, and who was his Rebbe? Rav. His Rebbe was Rav. Ikadam, some say a different version. Rav Yomi Bar Abba Amar Rav. He said, Rav Yomi said in the name of Rav, She'elti is Rebbe. I asked my Rebbe privately, and who was his Rebbe? Manu, who was his Rebbe? Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So he asked him, and therefore there was he said a different interpretation, and there's a different version of what pas ava is, what we're referring to. He said, "My pasava pas meruba." What we're talking about is not the thickness of the loaf of bread. It's not talking about the thickness, and it's not even an issue of what becoming chometz. It's pas meruba. It's many loaves, and the issue is baking on Yontiv. It's not specific to Pesach. It's how with the quantity of what you can bake. Now you can bake for Yontiv. You can bake for Yontiv only what you need for Yontiv, but you can't bake for Yemei Chol. So what we're talking about is pas meruba. That Beis Shammai says you can't bake pas meruba. You can't bake more than you need. So if that's the case, what's the pshat in Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel also might that you cannot cook from Yontiv to the next day, as when Gemara and Beis says and Rashi explains, is that when you can fill up the oven, that even if you're having extra loaves, and you know that those loaves you're not going to use for Yontiv, but you can fill up the oven with loaves, even there's going to be extra loaves that you will not use for Yontiv, but because qualitatively the bread is better when the oven is full, therefore you can fill up the oven, because as long as you're going to have the bread that you need for Yontiv, you can fill up the oven, because that's going to produce a better quality of bread that you have for Yontiv. Now, even though you know that there's going to be loaves of bread that you're not going to use for Yontiv, but nevertheless you can fill the oven, because the loaves that you will use for Yontiv will be a better quality. But as Taisus over here points out, he explains that however you cannot fill another oven. You can the loaves, the bread that you're using, that you're going to bake for today for Yontiv, so you can even fill up that oven, but you can't fill up another oven. You can't now bake in a different oven. So that's what we mean by pas ava. We mean pas meruva. Praktika meruva, my korele pas ava. Well, why is it called pas ava, thick, if it really means meruva? Yishum, the more answers, because the nefisha belisha, because you need a thicker batter, a batch of dough. You're making many loaves, so the batter that you use, the dough that you use, is thicker. It's a thicker batch to make all of these loaves of bread. Another answer is Ba'asri the Haitana Lufasum Ruba Pasava Korle. That's the way they refer to the quantity, they refer to it as Ava. My time, why does Beis Shammai say that you cannot do it, the Pasum Ruba, Imishum de Tirchel, if it is, as we explained, because you're going to be Tirchel, that's not necessary for Yontiv, and you can't do Malacha for the next day. Well, if that's the case, my Pesach, then why does it say Pesach? It's not a Pesach issue, it's a Yontiv issue, and it applies to all the Yom Tov. The Gemara answers, Ein Hachinami. Yes, that's true. It does apply to all Yom Tovim. Vaytana b'Yontiv shel Pesach Kohen. The Tana was teaching the halachas of Pesach, so he mentioned this in the context of Pesach, but really it's relevant to all of the Yom Tovim. Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned similarly in the Baraisa, based Shamei Ayrim Ein Eifin Pasav b'Yontiv. It doesn't say Pesach; it says b'Yontiv or Beis Helmatirim. Tan Rabbana, we learned in the Brayso, you can be Yaitzi of Achilas Matzah bepas Nakia, with made white bread, with flour that's white, and the matzah comes out that it's white bread, Ubahadra, and with coarse bread that is coarse, and also Ubasarikim Hametzior, with sarikim which have decorations on them. So you have matzah where they etched out on the matzah, they etched out different designs or different forms or pictures of animals, etc. You can be yaitze with that type of a matzah. Now, so you're yaitze with the pas, so sarikim mitziyarim bepesach, afal pishe amru ein oisim sarikim mitziyarim bepesach. Even though lechatchila you should not make it, lechatchila it should not be done. But b'di'evad, if he did, he's yaitze the mitzvah. It should not be done because the time that it takes out to etch these etchings, we're afraid that it will become chometz. But the Eved, he's yaitza. Amar of Yehuda Dover Zeh Shal Baises Ben Zayin Al Chachamim. He asked the Chachamim, B'pnei Ma Amru Ein Oisim Srikim Mitziyarim B'Pesach. Why can you not use these designs, matzah that has designs etched on Pesach? Amar Lo, the answer B'mnei Sheisha Shoya Lo Mach Matzah also. Because it takes time for her to make the etchings, to make the designs, and in the time that it takes to do that, it delays the baking of it, and now it can become chometz. So Amr Lahan, so he said to them, well, you can make a stamp or make a mold and just stamp on the design, and that it doesn't take a lot of time, and then you don't have the chashash of chimutz. So actually, a son of Betvus, you can ben a kivin and imprint it, and it happens right away. Amrullah, they said, yes, theoretically you're right, but Yamra calls Sarikin Asurin or Sarikin Baitus Mutorim. Most people don't have these stamps. So should they say that your matzah Sarikin is mutter, everyone else is also? They can't distinguish it that way. They have to make a lay plug. And since they have this chashash by other bakers, therefore they said it should not be done. And they brought this type of matzah that has designs. Amarti, so he said, I said to my father, isn't it so that the Chum said that you should not use this type of matzah on Pesach? Amardi, he said, B'ni loy shel kol adamam. They didn't say shel kol adam, ela shel nachtum imam. What they were referring to is for bakers, but the ones that are homemade are mutter. So what's the svara over here? I mean, the svara is that the bakers, they'll be careful to do it professionally. So since they'll take more care with it, they'll be more intricate, therefore it'll take a longer period of time, there's a greater chashash of chimutz. But a homemade one is not so professional, and it's not done with such care, and therefore the chashash, you don't have this chashash of chimutz. So that's what he answered. Just the opposite. That he said, Lo shel nachtem. They didn't say it of bakers. El shel kol adam. The Isra de Lacharchila, they said, was referring to kol adam, because the kol adam, they're not so professional. The bakers who are professional, they know how to do it quickly, and they're not going to take so much time. So there is our mutter. But the kol adam would be asr according to this version. But that's what he said. But what we hold is that neither of them are mutter, and sarikin, we don't make sarikin. But Lamaisa, the Shulchan Aruch mentions our matzahs do have, we do have the perforations. We have our matzah with the perforations that are made so that the dough doesn't rise. But Shulchan Aruch says that those type of perforations are not called sarikin because they're made very quickly and they're not intricate designs. So those types of etchings that we do have on the matzah, those types of perforations that we do have on the matzah are mutter. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Eisen sarikin k'may rikikin. You can make the sarikin that are thin like wafers. Vein oisim sarikin k'may gluskois. But he says you can't make him like rolls. You can make him thin like wafers, but you can't make them like gluskois. It says they use machalik in that way, but we don't tell halacha. The Bach brings down that we don't paskin like this either. We're not machalik between whether they're thick and thin, and we do not permit this sarikin. Tan Rabbanan Asuv Gonim, if it was made like sponges, Vadushanim, or made with honey, Vaskeritin, or like wafers, Vachalas Amasres, or it was made in a pan. The Gemara will explain this more carefully, in more detail shortly. Vahameduma, or if it's a meduma, which is a mixture of truma and chulin, peturim min achala. All of these cases are a patur min achala. They're a patur from chala. The Torah says, "Ba'achlachem milechem haaretz," that the chiv of chala, of when you have the batch of dough that's made in the quantity, the shiur that's chayiv in chala, then you have to be mafresh, you have to take off a portion as part of the matnas kahuna. So if you have a batch that's 43.2 bayim, you have to take out challah, but it has to be something which is defined as lechem. So all of these things are not defined as lechem, and therefore it's patur min challah. My chalas hamasres, what is chalas hamasres? That it's in a pan. Amr Yishu ben Levi ze cholit shabalei batim. This is cholet, it's scalded of balabatim. The balabatim, when they make the bread, and sometimes they scald it first. So we had machlokes rishonim what that is. There's different sheets as what it means exactly with scalding, but the sheet Ramban is that before the flour is scalded first in boiling water initially, before the baking. So these types of things are not called lechem. Now we know why meduma is not called lechem. Meduma, the mixture of chulin and truma, is not called lechem because the pasuk says tarim truma. So as Rashi explains, it says tarim truma, that challah has to be what you remove, and it's the first thing that you remove from that is the removal of the challah. But over here, this is, it already had truma. If you had a mixture of truma and chulin, it's meduma, there was already a harimu of, there was already a removal of the truma. Truma was already removed. So therefore, it's, over there, it doesn't have the chiyuv of challah. But what about the other things? What about the other 4 items? So Omar Reish Lakish, halal ma'aseh ilfesein, he says they're not called lechem because they're made in a frying pan rather than in an oven, so it's not called lechem. Rav Yochanan Omar ma'aseh ilfes chayavim. Rav Yochanan says no, the fact that it's in a frying pan is not a patur. Ma'aseh ilfes are chayavim. V'halal al shason b'chama. Here, the reason that they're not called bread is because they're not baked in an oven at all. They're not even a frying pan. They're baked in the sun. So it's not called lechem, and that's why they're potter from challah. Meisvei ask kasha to Reish Lakish. They, from the following sisters of Agana v'duv shonim v'as kritin, asan be'ilfas chayovin. It says that you made it in a frying pan, they're chayovin. Bechama peturim, but in the sun, they're peturim. Tiyuf the Rabbi Shem ben Lakish. It's a tiyuf the Reish Lakish. Amr Ula says, Amr Rav Shimon ben Lakish, he'll answer, why are we saying over here in the frying pan that it's lechem and you're chayiv? Because we're talking where first he heated up the frying pan, it's hot, then he stuck the dough to it, so in effect it's like an oven. So that is like baking in an oven. But he says, when the case before the previous brisa, when he says that it's potter, it's talking by a pan, it's talking where it was not heated up first. First he stuck it to the pan, and then he heated it up. That's in some similar to frying, and that's not similar to baking. But you mean to say that if he attached it, and then he heated it up, and then he attached it to the cold pan, and then he heated it up, that you'd say that achanami the peturim would be potter? So if that's the case, well, if that's the case, if it said, when it says asam b'cham, if you made it on the cham peturim, liftak v'lisna b'didah, why don't you make a chiluk even in the frying pan? When do we say that it's chayev, that it's considered a challah when it's heated up, and then you attach the dough? But if it's hidbik and then you heat it up, it's potter. So it should make that chilik. So the more answers en chanami. It's really missing the following. When do we say that by a pan you're chayiv shir teach l'seif hidbik? When it was heated up first and then you stuck the dough to it. Aval hidbik or l'seif tiach. But if it's hidbik and l'seif tiach, if first you attach it, then you heat it up. Nasa kimisha sam b'chama. It's like it was fried, it was like baked in the sun, and upeturim, and your potur. So then you're potur in such a case. Now this machlokes, whether frying it, attaching it to the pan, is considered lechem or not considered lechem. This whole machlokes zero yach and Reish Lakish, but as Shulchan Aruch points out, that's only where it's not deep fried. But if it would be deep fried, it would be considered to be bishul and would not be considered to be lechem. The Sas Emes has an interesting shaila. He says over here we're machalik in Reish Lakish between where it's hidbik v'seif tiach or tiach v'seif hidbik. And we're saying that if it's your tiach v'seif hidbik, if first you heated it up the pan and then you attach the dough to it, then it would be chayv and challah. What about in a case where it's tiach v'seif hidbik? So then you'd say it would be chayv, but then it was baked in the sun. Do you consider it like baked in the sun and it's potter, or fried and it's chayiv? He said it's mash from the loshon that we say over here that of al hidbik of l'sefer tiach nasa k'misha alsam b'chama upeturim, that in any event, if it was baked in the sun, it's potter, even in a case where it's your tiach l'sefer hidbik. So the Gemara now says, once another kasha from Mishlagish Tashma, let's bring a kasha from the following. It says, Yaitza matzah hina. You can be yaitza with matzah hina, half-baked matzah. Uba matzah asuya be'ilfis, and a matzah asuya be'ilfis made in a pan. So you see, with it made in a pan, it is considered lechem, and you can be yaitza yechiva matzah. Here also we're talking where it was first heated up and then hidbik. My matzah hina. What is matzah hina? What is matzah hina? Amar Yehuda Mishmuel kol sheporsa. When you break it apart, ve'ein chutin mishachim menu. It's properly baked, and therefore you can break it apart, and the strands of dough don't pull out from it. So it's baked enough that you don't have the sticky strands of dough. When you break it apart, it doesn't come out from it. It's not pulled out from it.